Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think this debate reminds me why at the beginning of this session I asked the whips if I could get on the Economy Committee. Unfortunately, they put me elsewhere because clearly the work of this committee is both interesting and of value. And this report they've produced is an example of that. I find myself on Rural and Environment Committees now marking my own report card, reviewing things I did as a minister. A bit odd, but there we are. But the important point is the 2016 Scotland Act, which has devolved consumer advocacy and advice to this place, is very much to be welcomed and is the foundations of what we're discussing today. But of course, advocacy and advice need not be all that we do. We can inform as well as advocate and advise. We can inform manufacturers, we can inform small businesses. The important point is to understand through evidence why consumers experience harm and develop solutions that increase consumer fairness. Thereby, we increase consumer confidence. And I think an important thing to think about is, in this context, we are not setting up something in opposition to manufacturers and suppliers. On the contrary, an informed and demanding consumer that raises the game of suppliers and manufacturers is in the interests of those businesses because it will make them more competitive in their efforts to sell into their local market and to export markets. In other words, good products command a market. So they are not the enemies of businesses. Now, just to turn to some of the detail, looking at the policy memorandum, I note paragraph 29 that Consumer Scotland will be a body corporate and that one of the things that will be necessary is for there to be an ordering council because the civil service is a reserved matter. And I simply ask the Minister now or at a later point to perhaps advise whether he's engaged with the UK government to get assurance that such consent will be given. I'd be surprised if there'd be any difficulties, but I think just as a matter of completeness. In terms of paragraph 66 in that same document and elsewhere, we talk about impacts on Highland and Island communities and rural communities more generally, and of course representing a hybrid area that is both very rural, but also significant large towns. I have a particular interest in the application of this to areas that are more distant from city centres. I see no reason to doubt that there will be benefits there as they are elsewhere. A subject that's come up from a number of people, most notably and recently from Jackie Bailey in relation to white goods, is the issue of product recall. And one of the things I previously have said in this place is we should seek to get the number, the serial number of a white goods on the front of the goods, because it's actually round the back in every case. You've got to take it out of its installation to find the product number. And I think that's a big contributor to why so many recalls don't actually have high returns, because people find it very difficult to find out if their whirlpool or whatever it might be is subject to a recall. And while we don't have the power to command that, we certainly through this vehicle might have the power to persuade and inform and make consumers demand that it happens. Richard Locke has been successful on delivery charges. Gordon Lyndhurst, in his committee remarks, made mention to it. We've also had mention of the issue of chlorinated chicken. I think that leads us to the issue of labelling of products and their origins, because I think that informs the consumer as to whether the product that they might be contemplating buying, particularly in food, is one which they really want to talk about, want to engage with and buy. But we cannot do everything that we might want to do. We can't cut into competition law or operation, but we can certainly assist consumers in making choices. I think also another reserved issue, which nonetheless we could engage in, is trying to help consumers understand what advertising means. And I include in that much of what happens on social media, where the boundary between advertising, comment and information is not always particularly clear. This bill and what will be done is not just about preventing harm, it's about delivering real benefits. Others have talked about citizens' advice. I strongly support them, and there are regular posts that I would send my constituents onto when they have difficulties. And I certainly would not wish to see their role diminished in the many communities in which they are represented on the ground with local people as the directors, and local people understanding local needs. A central body elsewhere might be less able to engage with direct local issues. Now, let me close, Presiding Officer, on the issue of vulnerability and vulnerable consumers, which has come up. And one of the interesting things when Andy Whiteman raised the Donoghue versus Stevenson case in 1929, is that May Donoghue, who pursued that case, actually relied on the informa pauperis. In other words, she was actually a pauper. So therefore she was able, because she was a pauper, to take that case all the way to the House of Lords, because she was relieved under that provision of carrying the costs of her opponent should she lose the case. And I think that's a very interesting example, going some distance back, that might inform how we see this new body operate. She was a pauper to the extent that only one of her 4 sons survived into adult life. She has delivered, as the most famous litigant in life, a little bit that contributes to this debate. Presiding Officer.